Okay. So I got a little trans tint dye mixed with some alcohol, and I'm just going to put a first coat on it. And the first coat is definitely needing a lot more dye, so let's increase that. So for this first coat, I'm going to go, just going to do it once. First coat's always splotchy. It's also sort of aimed at finding the deep scratches. That's a little better. So we want to get a lot. To get that grade real dark. And by the way, even if I come and do a color after this, I usually always do black first because I like to darken the grain, darken the valleys, I guess, in the châtaignions, or however you pronounce that. Yeah. That's a pretty good first coat, but still not dark enough for me. And also, got quite a bit of machine marks from my sander. So, it's pretty helpful for that. But I want a good deep dye into that grain. So, I might even go one more on this. Yeah. So now, let this dry a bit. I'm going to sand this off, get these other machine marks out of it. And depending on how well that goes, I may have to come back over there and do it again. Usually when you dye a top like this, you sand it back at least once or twice and refine your color. Okay, so I sanded it back. I got all the machine marks out of it, and I put another coat in here. So what I need to do, again, this is just to fill the dark bits of the grain. We want that dark bit, but we want the light bits to shine through a little better. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my sander with 320 grit, and I'm going to sand this back a bit. What I have here is pretty much what I'm after. We got it sanded back. Lots of the grain's real dark, and I'm gonna come back over it. This time, I'm gonna come in with a little bit lighter black. Maybe half what it was before. So I want to build it up just a little bit. I'm going to add just a drop or two of blue. Just a slight hue of blue in this. This is just pure alcohol. I'm going to wipe, go around it. It's straight alcohol, no color. And this is just to help you blend everything a little better. I take the streaks out of everything. Now I'm going to burst it a bit, so I'm going to go right back to my original black. I don't want to come in heavy on the edges here. And I might do this a few times. Now, take my alcohol one, blend those edges in. Back here, one more coat. This time I'm cutting a little bit. Wow, that's good stuff. Back to my alcohol. Start blending it. Not any hard lines. That's where the alcohol helps. Real aggressive. I'm trying to set it back out at this right side. Before you hit it with just the neutral, you can kind of take the stain back out of it and kind of lighten it up a little. One thing you can do with the colors is counteract. So if you've got a real yellow top, then if you had some purple, you could take that yellow out. Now this is a real light top, so I didn't really need to do that, but that is an option as well. Back over in the center, lighten, center up again. That's what I'm after for a good burst. See what I want to do. I'm going to go over it with a dry cloth. Too upset with this. It's pretty good. Oh.
actually a little bit of base coat because I'm going to burst the edges. I like to put a sanding sealer on here because I'm an impatient person. My favorite is the Solarez sanding sealer, which is pretty awesome because you can just apply it with a brush, take it outside for 2 minutes, and it's cured. You can sand it, rinse and repeat. It's real thick stuff, so you don't need to grain fill when you use it, which is another awesome bonus. Unless, of course, you want the color in the grain. I sometimes do that, but for this one I am not. So right now, what I have is some naphtha. Naphtha is a good all-around, just cleaner and dust remover. Just gets the dust off. And once the naphtha's gone, it dries real quick. I go over it with a tap cloth because I would like just a nice smooth finish. And hold on. Next, I just let it rest here for, a few minutes. And this is a bit of a self-leveling sort of finish. So if you let it rest a minute, it'll kind of smooth out and get a little flatter before you take it out to the sun and dry it. And that'll help you sand it smooth. This is the 3rd coat. That's all I'm doing with the sanding sealer. 3 coats should fill all your grain, give you a nice base coat after you sand it smooth, obviously. And then once it's sanded smooth, we move on to the 2K clear. Okay, so what I have here is I've pre-cut all the frets to rough length. I use a fret bender here. I didn't show that. I'm kind of skipping over some of the fret details because it's boring. But I'm using a fret bender, and because I have binding on here, I'm using a fret nipper, which just nips off the end of this a little bit and gives you a little room to overline over the binding. That's pretty much it. Now the other thing I got here is I've got a special, I got a 12-inch radius on this fretboard, and I got a 12-inch caul here, and I'm just going to use it to press these in. You can do it with a small brass hammer, and I've done that many times, but I find that this method sets it more evenly. It's important to note, before you get to this fret job, start pressing frets, here's a little cheap tool from Stu Mac, which is a depth finder, and it roughly tells you the depth of your fret tang. And I just use that inside the fret slot, and you just double check it lines up with the line on there, and that lets you know that you're going deep enough.
I'm not going to do a full refret now, but I'll make sure the frettings are nice and even with the fretboard before I install it and put it in. After I've got the guitar finished and all that, then I'll do the final fretwork. Here's a little tool I made. It's just a file put into a block at a roughly 30-degree angle, and that just helps me put a nice consistent bevel on the frets. Okay, so I got the neck glued on. I took a little bit of glue and mixed it with mahogany dust. Just kind of cleaned up some of my gaps that I have here, just to close everything up. And so the next step I need to do here is I've drilled this out with a small drill bit all the way through, but I need to widen them out to fit the tuning pegs, and those are 10mm holes. To do that, I like to use a step bit. Cut from both sides. Just make sure you get a good clean hole. Okay guys, so I got the neck glued on and I've sanded everything, I sealed everything, and now I'm gonna add a bit of a burst to the outside edge here. I'm gonna go around the edges and airbrush a burst on this thing, and I'm going to do that with just a little airbrush. Black base coat. I'm using automotive finishes here because, well, I think they're more convenient than lacquer. Okay, so now that I've got about 5 coats of 2K clear on here, I had a bit of fish eyes in this, which you can easily clean up just by putting a little 2K clear on a small brush and just filling in the craters. That happens from contamination or something like that. You hope it doesn't happen, but that's how you fix it if it does. So after fixing that, wet sand the whole thing. I'll start with 1000 grit sandpaper. Wet sand level it. When I'm spraying this out, and I didn't show that part because I don't want to damage the camera, and it's just hard. But when you're spraying this out, I'll hold the guitar flat while spraying it so I can get a nice coat, a thicker coat than I would if I'm trying to spray vertically. And that'll help me get a smoother finish on the top, so I don't have to work so hard to get out any extra orange peel. And that works pretty well. So here again, we got 1000 grit sandpaper, and I just, slowly work myself, work in small areas. It's really not a whole lot to it. I keep rags near me so I can check my work frequently. So wipe off the excess, take a look. You
Usually it takes a minute to dry. I'll just work on a little bit different area while that's drying. If you do a good job spraying, it makes this part a lot easier. I know the first few times I did this, I didn't spray enough finish, which is what happens if you don't have enough flow out and you get a real big orange peel problem. Not the end of the world, it just takes a lot more work to figure it out. But if you can dial in your spray technique, it saves you a lot of this work. It. Bore you with watching all this forever. I'm just gonna keep going until I'm across the whole body. There's a couple spots that ended up being pretty high, real high low spots, and I'll get those down with a combination of a razor blade and sandpaper here. But basically I'll repeat this step once more. I'll do 1,000 grit, then I'll do 1,200 grit. And the next step is I'll take it to my buffer, and the buffer should take out everything else. And I'll do that in 3 consecutive steps. You go 3 different grades, like a heavy grade buffing compound, a medium, and a fine. And I'll show you that next. So now that I've got this sanded down, I've got a pretty aggressive buffing compound on here. And this is my little jig that I made here. It's just my lathe, and I created a little chuck and glued in a piece of threaded rod, and then screwed it to the end, and thrust bearing, and it works pretty well here. And because lathes have a RPM control, I can control the speed, and I'm buffing, I think the number is 1,700 feet per minute on the surface speed of the wheel. You have to look it up. Stu Beck has it. But basically, I'm going to try to get I only went to 1,000. I'm going to see if I can get it out with this heavier compound buffing wheel. When you're buffing, I think for safety's sake, as long as you keep buffing below the center line, probably won't have any problems. Well, the nice thing about buffing is you take it to your buffing wheel, just do a quick buff, and you'll find real quickly some of the big problem areas. I've got some spots where I hit it a little too aggressively. That's it. Just gonna hit this, do a quick. It's that horn, you don't want to go too crazy with the horn. Okay, so what I have here is I finally buffed and got this guitar shiny. And now it's time to start positioning the bridge. And I did this last step because I do not want the water from the wet sanding to get into the holes for the bridge and to cause the finish to lift. You can get around that, I guess, if you use like a paste wax or something like that and seal the holes, but I feel like this is less dangerous. But it's never not scary. So basically what we're doing is a Nashville bridge. Nashville bridge is positioned at a slight angle. We get a 25-inch scale length here, so First stud is basically dead on 25 inch, and then the other one's about 30 seconds of an inch tilted on the base side. So I've got tape here. I've got my 2 lines where I want them to be, or tilted forward to the base side. And these studs are 73.5% away. Now, it's a good idea to leave the tape on here when you're drilling your holes, and that just kind of helps ensure that you do not chip out your finish. Another thing you want to do is make sure you use a very sharp drill bit. If you don't have them, I mean, go to your local woodcraft or something and just get the couple drill bits that are high quality for this process, and probably the tuner heads. So without further ado, I guess, let's get this drilled. One more thing I forgot to mention. I'm using a laser here. You can see it somewhat. To mark, and I've marked the center line of my neck, both the front and back, lined it up, and I use that to find my exact center line on this guitar. As it aligns to the neck, it might be maybe a millimeter off the center line, but it's more important that it lines up with the neck than it is the center line on the guitar. Ideally, in a perfect world, those are exact, and I'm pretty close. I'm within a millimeter, but just so you know, that's a good thing. This is the last little bit of this, and we're just going to these posts are pretty large, but this is a little tool you can get on StewMac, and it's quite handy for pressing in those little bits. And there you have it. We have our studs installed. So what I'm doing here, I personally like a good oiled neck, so that is what I do with my neck. I did not spray the automotive clear on it, or the 2K clear. I instead am opting to go for a few coats of oil, and I just believe a nice natural feel is the best. And so this is true oil. You just rub it on. This first coat takes a lot of oil. I guess the thing you want to make sure you do here is not go overboard. You definitely don't want to get any oil on your finish. You can see I've taped off and finished a bit. First coat more or less just seals the grain. So what I'll do, so I put it on there. This true oil takes a few minutes. I'll wait about 10 minutes until I just get a little bit of stick, and then I'll go ahead and wipe the excess off. And that I'll do that about 5 or 6 different times, and that ensures a nice, real thin, real smooth coat that feels great on the hands. So I'm on to my next favorite part, which is obvious sarcasm, and that's leveling the frets. To do that, I use a fine grit sandpaper on a radiusing beam. I use the long one, and I think that reduces your error of having any high-low spots. When you do it this way though, you gotta make sure that you got an absolutely flat neck. And I'll check it with the truss rod before I start. And you should always do that anyway, but it's more important when you're using a long beam, otherwise you'll take a ton of material off of either end of the frets, or maybe the middle if it's humped in the middle. So that's something to look forward to, or look out for. But pretty straightforward. Just keep going. I use a marker here, mark off all the frets. I keep going until they look all even. Once that's done, I can start crowning the frets and nibbing off the sharp ends. It's a good idea to protect your top when you're doing this, because God knows I've wrecked a few that way too. When I'm going after this, sometimes I'll occasionally remark the frets just to ensure that I've gotten them re-leveled, and double check my work. Okay, so now we got to nib off the sharp ends on the frets. I've got it leveled out, and to do that, I have a file where I ground off the file basically on the ends, and that basically allows me to get real close to the fretboard and just get that little bit there. And it's a real quick operation. I'll just do it a couple times and kind of rotate as I do it. And I like to go down one side and then come back up the other. So what I'm doing here is I'm working my way up the grits. Going over slightly. I like to go over the edges here and work on them. So work on the edge. Ever so slightly. And work on the other edge. It's nice. Use my finger, stiff, and I roll them over. This both polishes the fret and puts a little bit more of a nice round over on it. And I'll just kind of come up through the frets. That was 800 grit. I started with about 300. That's probably the last one I'll do. This just takes out the extra scratch marks. Alright, so the next step is I'm going to polish these to a high gloss. We're all leveled, we're all crowned, our edges are nice and rounded over, so it's nice and comfy to play. So I just want to polish these up, and to do that I will just tape off the fretboard because that makes a bit of a mess. Now that I've got the frets leveled, ground, the edges smoothed out, and I've gone over it with a few grits on the edges and the tops. Now I'm going to final polish it. And to do that, I just use a bit of buffing compound, same stuff I use to sharpen my blades on my leather strop, and a Dremel with buffing wheel on it. Charge the buffing wheel a little bit. Doesn't take too much. Don't focus on too much because they get hot. So I'm just going to use a step bit because that's my favorite method of expanding out one of these for the input jack. Okay, so this next step here, I've got a
bone nut, and I've dimensioned it with some sandpaper so it fits in here, and cut it down with a jeweler saw. It's like I did for, like I would for cutting inlays. And so what I want to do here, now that I've got it seated and it's on the bottom, it's completely flat on the bottom of the nut slot. And we need to add a radius to this, pretty close. To do that, that adds a little bit of a radius. I'm going to actually use that as a guide to shape her down. Double check it. Again, this is just a pencil that I cut in half. Next step is I've got a radius block here. A little protection. So what I'm going to do is follow the angle of the headstock. And I'm just going to kind of sand it. And keep going for a while. Until I hit that line. When I'm positioning or marking, I've already shaped it, sanded it, rounded over the corners a bit, and buffed it out to a shine. And now I need to actually cut the slots. So I've got this fretwork ruler here. It's a pretty handy little tool. I've lined up about an 1/8, actually exactly an 1/8 inch for each side of the fretboard. Mark my nut, and now I'm coming back to, this is just a razor file. Razor file is a nice way to get a line established. I'm just going to establish a channel for these. I'm not actually going to take them to depth until I am ready for strings. So all we're going to do here is follow my razor file line until I've got just enough of a slot to hold string. Okay, so what I have here, the guitar is assembled, and sorry I didn't show all that in the video, but I mean, it's relatively straightforward. I had the hardware, I added those, some of the wiring's done, that part's boring, so I definitely didn't show that. The pickups, one thing I will do is that when I put I'll put the first 2 strings on, and then I position the pickups because, you know, there's a little bit of play in these cavities. So I put the strings on, then I move them back and forth till they're pretty well centered over the pole pieces. And then I mark and drill my screws for the pickup rings. And then the next part is I am slotting the nut here. And what I'm looking for is a very low clearance on the first fret with this fret pushed down. And I'm looking for barely just a skosh above the fret in ear gap. And you'll see it here. See if I can get it. So just a tiny bit. And I want that for all 6 strings. And that's going to make it easy to fret and no detuning when fretting as well. So I'm going to continue that, and soon we'll have this thing ready to plug in.